Charlotte moved quietly through the rows of dusty books in the old university library. Sunlight filtered in through tall windows, illuminating small specks of dust dancing in the air. She was used to this tranquil environment, stacks of pages, the scent of old paper, and the gentle hum of students working on their research. As an assistant librarian, Charlotte had spent more time with books than with people. Most days, she preferred it that way. Books were reliable companions. They didn't betray or drift away. But she always felt a quiet yearning in her heart for something new, an unspoken desire that, until now, had seemed impossible to name. She was tidying up the newer acquisitions section when a student dropped off a few ancient tomes at the desk. As she flipped through them to note their condition, an envelope slipped out and fluttered to the floor. Bending to pick it up, Charlotte realized it was a letter written in exquisite cursive. She carefully opened the thick ivory paper, curiosity burning inside. The date at the top read 1927, and the signature at the bottom was Henri. The note was addressed to someone named Lucille and spoke of longing for her in Paris, promising to take her to see the gardens at the Palais Royal and stroll along the Seine. Skeptical but intrigued, Charlotte examined the tome's inside cover, trying to find a clue about how such a letter had found its way here. Over the next several weeks, she checked the logs for the dusty volumes the student had returned, discovering they were part of a donation from a retired professor whose estate had been sorted and boxed up. The letter was the first of many she would find. Soon Charlotte realized she had inherited an unexpected puzzle, a flock of vintage love letters scattered among the shelves and old donations. The library was far too large for a single person to search through every trunk, file, and decaying book. Yet one by one, more letters found their way to her desk. Each piece of correspondence came from Henri, addressed to his beloved Lucille. No return address appeared on the envelope. Instead, the missives offered tantalizing references to Parisian locales, the Tuileries Garden, a café near Montmartre, the small bookstores along the left bank. Charlotte's heart pounded every time she read Henri's words. He described the taste of café au lait on a cold morning, the feel of a breeze drifting across the Pont Neuf, and the marvel of strolling under the Eiffel Tower's shimmering lights. They were full of passion, marked by an earnest plea for Lucille to join him across the ocean. But there was a sense of desperation in each letter, too. Henri wrote of waiting for Lucille to answer, to step off the ship so they could begin their life together. Charlotte wondered why Lucille had never made the journey, or if she had at all. As the letters kept appearing, she developed an almost dreamlike obsession. By the 8th letter, Charlotte began to map out the references, scribbling notes in a small journal she carried everywhere. She would transform each mention of a street corner or museum into a dot on the map of Paris. Over days, those dots formed a sort of itinerary. Henry's suggested path through the city of love. Where had this man gone? Did he live there permanently, or had he eventually returned? And what became of Lucille? Charlotte felt a deep pang of empathy for a romance that seemed to remain unresolved. It made her wonder about life's hidden choices, the fleeting opportunities for true connection that we might miss if we let fear dictate our decisions. With every new discovery, Charlotte's longing grew. She could easily lose herself in the romance of their words and notice a ghost-like ache in her own heart. She had never been to Paris, never walked along its boulevards, or tasted a croissant fresh from a boulangerie in the early morning sun. But as she studied Henri's lines, she could hear the distant hum of accordions, see the reflection of the Eiffel Tower in the Seine. She even began to dream of strolling the streets, following footprints left behind by two lovers whose fate was unknown. It was a fantastical notion for a small-town librarian on a modest salary, but her mind wouldn't let go of that map. One crisp autumn afternoon, with golden leaves swirling outside the library's wide windows, Charlotte discovered a final letter that changed everything. Inside an antique volume of French poetry, Pressed between pages 73 and 74 was an unfamiliar envelope. The writing matched Henri's, and as she carefully unfolded the letter, a postcard dropped out. A photograph of a Parisian bookshop with an ornate sign overhead that read Pages d'autrefois. The postcard's backside had a single sketched arrow pointing to a set of stairs beside the shop. The letter itself was full of heartbreak. Henri wrote of how he had waited for Lucille at the end of every day, scanning each boat's passenger list or searching in vain along the dock. He mentioned sending these letters to her family's home, unsure if they would ever reach her. The final lines read, "If you find this, whoever you may be, please know that a story remains unfinished. In Paris, the truth shall be revealed." Those lines sparked new life in Charlotte's routine. Every quiet evening after work, she researched genealogical records, scanned old newspapers, and tried to identify any link between Henri and Lucille. Perhaps a wedding announcement, a mention of a late honeymoon, anything to confirm what had happened next. Yet each path led nowhere. She wasn't even sure if Lucille had read a single one of these letters. A swirl of frustration built in Charlotte's mind, threatening to overshadow her enchantment with their breathtaking romance. She had to find out more. She needed closure for both herself and these vanished souls. That very winter, the library announced renovations scheduled for the spring semester. Staff members were encouraged to take their unused vacation time while the building was closed for construction. In all her years, Charlotte had never used more than a day or two of hers. She had saved it up as a nest egg of possibility, although she hadn't imagined what that possibility might be. Now it became obvious. She had to go to Paris. She would follow Henri's letters, step onto the tapestry of cobblestone streets he had described so vividly, and see if there remained any shred of the story's ending. The first week of March, she packed a small suitcase, sturdy shoes, a guidebook, her treasured map of Henri's references, and most importantly, all the letters she had collected. Butterflies fluttered in her stomach on the flight over, riddled with a thrilling sense of adventure she had never before experienced. She wondered if she was simply chasing a ghost, or if this quest might lead to something far more tangible. When Charlotte landed, Paris greeted her in a swirl of brisk air and soft rain. The taxi ride to her modest hotel in the Montmartre district passed lampposts draped with a gentle glow that felt both foreign and oddly familiar. She glimpsed the gray rooftops in rows, the wrought iron balconies adorned with flower boxes, and the twisting serpentine streets. This city felt like a revelation, as if she had stepped into the yearning of Henri's letters. Immediately, she set out to find a cafe from which to start her exploration. Henri's references were as detailed as they were poetic. She began with the Tuileries garden, strolling among the symmetrical lines of trees until she found a statue he mentioned in his third letter. The stone figure overlooked a small pond, a place, according to Charlotte, felt a tingle of excitement. She ran her hand over the worn bench, marveling at how the world changes so drastically around simple, unassuming places. Next, she meandered through the Louvre courtyard, noticing how the day's light played across the glass pyramid. Though enchanted, she felt a lingering hesitation. Everything here was beautiful, but she had yet to discover anything that advanced her search for Henri. Later that week, she visited the small bookstores along the Seine. Each stall or shop reminded her a little of home, except the books felt older, the titles more exotic, and the sense of wonder more palpable. She showed the postcard of Pages d'autrefois to various booksellers, hoping for a spark of recognition. Most shrugged. Some pointed her to neighboring streets. Others recommended she try the archives or the city's historical society. At last, an older gentleman with a cap tugged low over his eyes studied the photo carefully, his expression turning nostalgic. He recalled a shop with a name like that, but he believed it had closed years ago. When Charlotte pressed him for details, he could offer only a guess that it might have been in the Latin Quarter. One drizzly afternoon, she found herself wandering the narrow streets of the Latin Quarter, checking each twist and turn for something resembling the stairs in the postcard's background. The letter she carried described a hidden corner behind a worn wooden door, but she saw dozens of such doors. Fatigue hovered at the corners of her mind, but she pressed on. Eventually, she took a wrong turn, ending up in a quiet cul-de-sac. There, half obscured by ivy, was a sign, Pas jeu d'autrefois. Although the green paint was flaking, the words were still legible. Her pulse raced. This was it. The windows looked dusty and the door was locked. A small note stuck in the window read, "By appointment only. Please call." Below it sat a phone number scrawled in faded ink. Charlotte dialed immediately, breath catching as it rang twice before a rich baritone answered. She hesitated, then explained in halting French that she was a librarian from the United States, researching old Parisian bookshops. The voice on the other end, smooth, tinged with gentle curiosity, introduced himself as Gabriel Moreau, the caretaker for the building and the owner of the defunct shop's estate. He offered to meet her the following afternoon. When Charlotte arrived, Gabriel was already waiting on the street, a tall figure wearing a long wool coat. Something about his presence soothed her nerves, despite her inherent shyness. He unlocked the door, revealing a cluttered interior lined with towering shelves filled with volumes labeled in French and English. Dust coated everything in a velvety hush. As they carefully stepped inside, Gabriel explained that his grandfather had started the bookstore, but after his passing, the store had closed. "What brought you here?" Gabriel asked in lightly accented English. Charlotte hesitated before revealing the letters. Gabrielle listened attentively as she told him about Henri, Lucille, and her entire quest. Every so often he nodded solemnly, taking in every detail. He asked to see one of the letters. She shyly handed it over. As his gaze scanned Henri's words, a look of deep contemplation crossed his face. Without speaking, he motioned for her to follow him toward the back of the shop. He opened an old wooden door leading to a small storeroom and an adjacent staircase. Gabriel explained that there had once been apartments above the shop. He believed they occasionally rented rooms to traveling artists or writers. They ascended the stairs, each step creaking underfoot. On the landing stood a door with chipped paint, behind which was a tiny flat. A single window overlooked the street, facing a distant spire that rose above the rooftops. The space was bare, except for a dusty trunk perched in the corner. Gabriel pointed to it. "My grandfather left behind some papers from former tenants. This might be what you're looking for." Heart pounding, Charlotte approached the trunk. She undid the clasp and opened the lid. Inside were fragile diaries, faded photographs, and a stack of letters, all in French. She recognized the neat cursive of Henri's handwriting. It took her breath away. Rifling through them, she discovered glimpses of his life in Paris. Meticulous notes of daily routines, references to postcards he sent, and reflections on the overwhelming fear of losing Lucille for good. It seemed Henri had indeed spent time in this building, perhaps even rented this very apartment. But what baffled her was the presence of a second set of letters. These were in a different, daintier script, Lucille's. Reading them, Charlotte learned something surprising. Lucille had written back. She had been torn between staying home to tend to her ailing mother and risking everything to sail to a foreign land. She had penned lines about how her parents forbade her from leaving, how her mother's health worsened by the day, and how she feared she would never see Henri if she postponed too long. Yet Lucille promised that the moment her mother recovered, she would come. Page after page revealed desperation for a reunion, the emotional torment of being so far away from the man she loved. Yet these letters never bore any sign of having been delivered. A sob welled up in Charlotte's throat as she realized they had missed each other by circumstance and miscommunication. Henri believed Lucille had never responded, while Lucille's letters had apparently never been sent. Gazing at the final parchment, tears blurred her vision. Lucille wrote that she had lost her mother. that she could bear her grief no longer, and that she would come to Paris in the spring. The letter was dated March 1928. Had Lucille sailed after all? Charlotte's hands trembled. She turned to Gabriel, who was reading over her shoulder. His expression mirrored the swirl of emotions she felt. "This is incredibly tragic," he said quietly. "But maybe there is more somewhere." He stepped away, rummaging through the trunk's compartments. At last he retrieved an old ledger of the bookstore's records from 1928. Together they painstakingly scanned the names of those who had stayed in the upstairs apartment, searching for any sign of Henri or Lucille. Finally, they found an entry dated April 1928. It read, "Tenez, Monsieur Henri Delacour and spouse." Charlotte's heart skipped a beat. Could this mean they were married? That Lucille had indeed arrived? Closer inspection revealed that they'd stayed for just a month. Then another note followed. Tenants moved to country house near Giverny. Charlotte exhaled shakily. The knowledge that Lucille had actually joined Henri, that their love story did not end in heartbreak, filled her with a profound relief. Gabriel smiled at her. "This is a happy ending," he said, though his voice quivered with something akin to regret. His gaze lingered on Charlotte in a way that made her feel seen for the first time in a long while. She nodded, the emotions in her chest swirling between joy for Henri and Lucille and a sense of emptiness that came from the resolution of someone else's story. As they stood in the old storeroom, Charlotte felt an electric awareness pass between her and Gabriel. She thought of all the days she had spent lost in her library, reading other people's stories, never believing such magic might exist in her own life. In the stillness of that dusty room, it was as though the city's heartbeat pulsed through them both. An unspoken invitation lingered in Gabriel's quiet glance. They emerged from the apartment into the pale light of late afternoon. Gabriel locked up, then asked if Charlotte might join him for a coffee at a nearby cafe. She agreed, letting him lead her through winding streets until they found a small place with round bistro tables lining the sidewalk. Over steaming cups of espresso, the conversation flowed. They talked of literature, of old libraries, of longing and heartbreak, of hope. She learned that Gabriel too had once dreamed of escaping to write novels, but his responsibilities to family and the bookstore kept him tethered in place. He'd always imagined love would find him in an epic, storybook way, and like Charlotte, he had begun to think perhaps he'd missed that chance. As the cafe crowd shifted around them, Charlotte felt time stretch in a delicious slowness. She realized that though she had come chasing someone else's love story, perhaps fate was weaving a new one for her. The thought left her breathless, giddy, and even a bit afraid. She recalled Lucille's letters, words of heartbreak and dedication, and recognized the courage it took to risk the unknown. Gabrielle offered to show her more of the city. The next day, they began a shared odyssey, retracing Henri's footsteps, but from a place of new discovery. They ambled along the Seine where they exchanged their own literary anecdotes and silly jokes. At Notre Dame, they stood in hushed awe, the cathedral's grandeur making their own personal struggles feel both tiny and profound. Gabriel treated her to delicate pastries in a patisserie off a hidden alleyway, and Charlotte introduced him to the delight of marking up a secondhand book with personal scribbles, losing yourself in the story's margins. Day by day, their bond deepened. One evening, they stood on the Pont d'Arc, the lights of the city shimmering on the night air was crisp, and the Eiffel Tower glowed in the distance like a beacon. Gabriel gently placed his hand over Charlotte's, and she felt warmth spread through her. Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't pull away. He spoke softly of the ways love can hide inside old pages, whispering across time, guiding strangers toward an intersection of destiny. Charlotte thought of Henri and Lucille, who had nearly lost their chance to be together, and of the improbable series of events that had led her here. She realized that the city she had romanticized for so long felt like home now. In the days that followed, Charlotte found herself savoring every simple moment, running her hand over cafe tables worn by decades of customers, inhaling the perfume of the fresh bread at sunrise, letting the hush of ancient churches fill her spirit, and weaving through it all was Gabriel's presence, supportive, kind, curious. She resisted calling it love. It felt too soon, too fragile. But the hope bloomed anyway, winding around her heart like ivy. Before she knew it, the final week of her stay arrived. She began dreading her departure. The thought of returning home to the quiet library, to live among books and vanished authors, filled her with an ache. But an even stronger wave of anxiety surrounded the question, would anything remain of this deepening connection once she left? On her last full day, Gabrielle took her to Giverny, where they wandered the gardens that had once inspired Monet. Blossoms and pastel shades surrounded them, and a gentle breeze ruffled the willow trees by the pond. In that tranquil setting, Charlotte imagined Henri and Lucille settling in a countryside home, filling it with laughter and the soothing rustle of letters finally received, a future realized, no longer a dream. As they sat beside the water lily pond, Gabriel took her hand and placed a small envelope in her palm. Inside was a short note, handwritten in neat cursive. Your story is not meant to end here. Where it goes, only we can decide. Stay if you wish. Or, if you must leave, know you will always have a place in my heart and, I hope, in this city. His eyes shone with gentle affection. Tears prickled at Charlotte's eyes. She thought of the person she had been just a month ago, a shy assistant librarian, living quietly, always wishing for something more. And here she was, halfway around the world, discovering love in the city of romance. She didn't know what came next, but she felt Henri and Lucille's spirit urging her forward, reminding her that life is too fleeting for regrets. She leaned forward, brushing her lips softly against Gabriel. The kiss felt tentative, a question more than a statement, and she could feel him smile beneath it. When they drew apart, she whispered, I'm not ready for this story to end. That evening, they strolled back to the train station, hand in hand, discussing possibilities for the future. Charlotte's flight was scheduled for the next day, her job waiting for her back home. But for the first time, those obligations felt surmountable. She had options. There could be other positions, research opportunities, perhaps even ways to extend her trip. She realized that, like Lucille, fear had been the only thing holding her back. In the warm glow of Paris's street lamps, she and Gabriel embraced for a long moment. The city's gentle hum wrapped around them, a reminder that love is woven through time, bridging gaps and crossing oceans. They agreed they would find a way, refusing to let circumstances separate them, the way Henri and Lucille had nearly been torn apart. Charlotte could return briefly to settle affairs, but her heart was already rooted in this city's cobblestones, a tapestry of Aznavour tunes, the hush of bookstores, the silent testament of old letters that lead strangers to one another. In the hotel room that last night, she gathered Henri's letters gently, slipping them inside her suitcase. She thought of how far they had come, lost words bridging lifetimes, guiding people to places they never thought they'd go. Then she penned one final entry in her own journal. To Paris, you have given me courage. To Gabrielle, you have given me hope. And to Henri and Lucille, you have shown me that love endures when we fight for it, even if it hides behind torn envelopes and dusty books. Tomorrow, I begin a new chapter. I will return. At dawn, she took a taxi to the airport, torn between heartbreak and joy. Her head swirled with the memories of the last weeks, discovery, romance, the forging of a connection unlike any she had known. She breathed in the air of the city, letting its spirit imprint upon her mind. Then, with a trembling sigh, She promised Paris that she would come back for the life she never dared to dream was possible. When the plane took off, Charlotte gazed at the skyline as it receded beneath the clouds. She clutched a letter from Gabrielle in her hand, a message she had yet to open. She wanted to save it, to cherish a piece of him on that long flight home. She suspected it wouldn't be goodbye at all. Somewhere, in the space between hidden quests and fate, a path had opened for them. A path that began with vintage love letters and ended with her own heart, at last ready to answer the call.